Hey, this is Stephen Forbes, the Soul. I wanted to welcome you to my studio outside of Asheville, North Carolina, and my virtual workshop. Ann asked me to tell you a little bit about my background, so here goes. I was a corporate man in my when I was in my mid-20s, and I had a couple of different corporate jobs, and I really didn't like either one of them. I thought, I can't do this the rest of my life. I would wake up and for the first one anyway, I'd wake up on Monday mornings and felt like I was going to throw up, and then live for the weekends. And I thought, this isn't any way to go through life. So anyway, I dropped out of that. I quit that one and did another one, and then quit that one, and decided to go to Atlanta to visit a friend. And after I'd been here, really liked Atlanta back in the early 70s. And after I'd been here a few months, I was dating this young lady. And she said, why don't we take this pottery class together at Georgia State? She was finishing up her master's degree there in education, and had to pick up a few hours. And I was thinking about going back there on their return to college program. So anyway, we took this pottery class, and we were all pretty dreadful, as a lot of beginning potters are. The thing I really liked was the 2 weeks we spent on the wheel. I thought the wheel was really fascinating. Of course, I wasn't very good at it, but it was still a lot of fun, and I could see where it was a skill that I can keep practicing and learn. So anyway, I started going down there, essentially spending 7 or 8 hours a day working on the wheel, and actually got pretty good at it after a while. So about 1978, I was going to school on the GI Bill, and the government sent me a letter and said that I had to get into a degree program or lose my benefits. I went to my professor, who was about ready to retire, and asked him if I could possibly get in the graduate program. And he said, well, if you can pass a test, I'll let you in. So I passed the test, and he let me in, and then he retired. And a young guy who was actually about my age came in and started, he had a lot of revolutionary ideas as far as I was concerned. The other fellow was more of a traditional potter, and this fellow was really more of a hand builder, and glazes and low fire glazes, low temperature glazes, and that was what he emphasized. Anyway, I ended up getting an MFA in 1980, and decided rather than teaching, that I would try to set up a studio in the house that we had purchased in town Atlanta. It's a renovated house, and I decided to make the basement into my pottery studio. And I did, and a few months after that, I was trying to decide what kind of firing I wanted to do. Electric firing didn't do anything for me, and I didn't have enough money to build a downdraft kiln. So I thought, well, maybe I'll build a raku kiln out here in my backyard. And it costs about $600 for all the materials. And anyway, I started doing raku, and shortly thereafter, I fell in love with it. I really, really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the whole serendipitous nature of it. And I thought, this is what I want to do. So I started doing craft shows, and picked up a gallery in New York and Washington, D.C., and Atlanta, of course, and then even one out in Asheville. Of course, in the beginning, you're just doing the best you can. I was also waiting tables at night and tending bar on the weekends. And I remember about 2 years after I set up the studio and was continuing to do that, 10 bar and wait tables, woke up one morning and I thought, I'm too old for this. I've got to stop. I have to quit something. So I knew I didn't want to be a waiter or a bartender the rest of my life. And I thought, well, I'll just quit that and concentrate on the pottery. So I went in that night and quit. And the thing that was really interesting was within about 2 months, my work changed and everything kind of fell into place in terms of my work. And I replaced that income that I was making being in the restaurant business by selling my work. So also about that time, we discovered this property that we now live on outside of Asheville, North Carolina. It's an intentional community that was started in 1979, and it's about 90 acres. 60 acres of it is common land that everybody owns, and so there will never be any development right around us. And we're a mile off the blacktop, which makes it really quiet. It was really different than living in town Atlanta, which was really fairly noisy. But it's really quiet here, really peaceful, and I've enjoyed living. We've been here. We built this house here in 1991, 92, and so I've lived here almost 30 years, and it's just been wonderful. So that's kind of my background in terms of pottery. I've been doing raku exclusively for a little over 40 years now, full time. Haven't had another job. I haven't had a real job since I had the corporate jobs when I was in my 20s. I also wanted to tell you a little bit about raku and the history of raku. It was first done in Japan about 500 years ago. The potters would fire up pieces in a small kiln very rapidly, open the kiln up, take the pieces out, but they would let them air cool or quench them in water. And in 1960, a man named Paul Soldner, who was teaching pottery at Claremont College in California, was having to do a demonstration for Art Day. And he'd been reading about this Japanese raku, and so he decided to set up, build a small kiln, set up a kiln next to the reflecting pool, and fire pieces and quench them in the water, and to see what kind of effects he would get. And he said that the glazes just left him really cold, that it, so to speak, that it didn't do anything for him. And he was firing the last piece of the day, and he was standing there and noticed these pepper leaves lying around on the ground. And so he gathered them up into a pile and thought, I wonder what would happen if I took the hot piece out and rolled them around the pepper leaves. Of course, they caught on fire. He did it, and he caught on fire, and I guess the students were all pretty amazed at that. Anyway, he said the glazes were a lot more interesting, a lot richer than what he was getting when he was quenching them in water. So that was the beginning of American raku, where the hot piece is taken out of the kiln and put in combustible materials, and then the flames are smothered, and it causes a post-firing reduction atmosphere. Otherwise, he's reducing the oxygen by putting the glazes, the pieces, into a container, metal container with and putting the lid on that has combustibles. Put the lid on. Of course, it was burning, and then he smothered the flames, and it causes the molecule and the molecules in the clay and the glaze to be pulled out, because the fire wants to continue burning, and of course it's looking for oxygen wherever it can get it. So that's how American raku began. He did it, Soldner did it for about 10 years, and then I guess he got tired of it or something. He went on to something else that was related, but not raku. And a lot of other potters started doing it. I did a little bit when I was in school, but it was more like a, you know, it was like a beer party. You know, you go there and you drink beer and fire raku, which I don't recommend. I don't recommend you getting loaded and firing pots and pulling them out of the hot kiln and quenching them or putting them into combustible materials. I don't recommend that at all. So in this workshop, what I want to do is I want to first tell you about what it takes to make up a raku glaze, and then we're going to talk about glaze application and different ways of putting glazes on the pieces, and then we're going to do several raku firings. I wish I could be there with you to do them there, but I think that you'll get the information from watching this video. So then, the other thing is we're going to do Zoom meetings, a couple of Zoom meetings where you guys can ask me questions about the process. I also wanted to tell you about my gallery here in Asheville. It's really my exclusive gallery now. It's called Aerial Craft Gallery. We're a craft cooperative, but unlike most cooperatives, we are all high quality, long-time professionals, and we really stand out in the Asheville gallery scene. We're located at 19 Biltmore Avenue in the heart of downtown Asheville. So if you're ever in the area, please stop by. The thing that really is neat about our gallery is we all get 80% of anything we sell. Of course, we have to work 3 days a month, and we also have some committee work. But all in all, it's much better, much better than getting 50% of your sales. So again, if you're in Asheville, please visit us, Aerial Craft Gallery, 19 Biltmore Avenue, downtown Asheville. So I'm going to teach you how to mix a glaze. It's really quite simple. The glaze materials go into the water, and then we'll go from there. But right now I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to make up 1,000 grams, and the amount of water that it takes is about 3 cups. So I'm going to put 3 cups of water in this bucket, and then I've got a digital scale here. It's not as accurate as a triple beam, but it's sure a lot easier and faster to use. It's very important to wear a mask when you're dealing with these glaze chemicals. Almost all of them are insoluble, otherwise they're going to stay, the particles are going to stay in the water, they're not going to go into solution. There's a few glaze materials that are soluble, but all of these are insoluble. I'm going to start first with something called a suspender. And what it does is it keeps the glaze, after it's mixed, it keeps it up in suspension, and it's not going to sink all down to the bottom. If you don't use this with this recipe, everything a day or two later, everything is going to be like a rock at the bottom of the bucket. It's not going to be any good. The only glaze material that acts as a natural suspender is Gerstley borate. You may or may not have heard of that, but it's slightly soluble, and so if you have enough Gerstley borate in your recipe, say 30–40%, it'll keep the glaze up in suspension. You don't have to add this extra suspender. What I use for a suspender is something called hectorite. It's a lithium-based fine clay that expands like 25 times a particle size when it gets wet. and it will keep all the glaze materials up in suspension to keep them from sinking down to the bottom of the bucket. So it's very important to wear a mask when you're dealing with these materials. They are all toxic if they get in your lungs. The first one I'm going to put in is the hectorite. It only takes about 2%. There's another clay that's called bentonite that also can be used, 1 to 2%. The problem with bentonite is all of the materials have to be mixed dry together before they're put in the water. This one, for some reason, hectorite, you can just throw it in there and it'll keep, it'll mix in with the other glaze materials. So I'm going to put my mask on. This is a KN95 double mask, and I recommend you either wear a respirator or a N95 or a KN95 mask, really an N95, but I'm going to wear a double KN95. So if I'm making up 1,000 grams, then the percentages work just like they would with 100 grams, except you're multiplying them by 10. So I'm going to put in 2% hectorite, which is 20 grams. So I'm going to set my scale on 0, and then I'm going to put in 20 grams. So if you put in 21, 22, with this material, it doesn't really make much difference. I'm going to shake that on there, shake it down into the water, and then move on to the next material. This glaze has a lot of silica in it. Most glazes don't have this much silica, but for some reason, this glaze works really well with silica. The good thing about silica is it will, in a copper glaze and raku, it will bind with the copper and keep it from reoxidizing or oxidizing. We're reducing it, and then it could oxidize again. And if you don't have enough silica in your glaze, it won't be very stable. So this glaze has 30% silica. That would be 300 grams in a 1,000 gram batch, would be 30%. So I'm going to measure this in here, 300. There it is, 300, right on the nose. Again, I'm not going to dump it all in at once. I'm going to kind of move it around, flake it into or pour it into the bucket, but not all at once. So the next ingredient is a frit. I'm going to tell you more about frits in a little bit, but this is a frit. It's called number 3110, and it's 20%. So I'm going to put the frit in. I'm going to put 200 grams in. That'd be 20%, right? So there we go, 200 grams. Flake that in and move it around so you're getting it mixed in a little bit before you actually do the mixing. The next ingredient I'm going to put in is called nepheline cyanide, or Nef-Cy for short. Nepheline cyanide is very much like a feldspar in terms of its chemical makeup. It takes 15% Nef-Cy, so it's 150 grams. Whoops. Well, I have to turn my scale on here. 150 grams. Okay. 150. I'm going to put that in. If you're doing this for the first time or even the 10th time, it's probably not a bad idea to mark them off as you do it. Because invariably what's going to happen is somebody's going to interrupt you and then you're going to lose where you are. And if you're not that familiar with the materials, you should just be checking them off as you do it. The next ingredient is kaolin. Kaolin is a clay. In fact, this clay, Edgar Plastic Kaolin, EPK, is mined in Florida. And it's very well known. It's used a lot in porcelain clay bodies. So we get 10 grams, 10% kaolin, or 100 grams. There we go, 100 grams, 10%. I'm going to put this in here. Now the next ingredient is lithium carbonate. Lithium is used to be pretty cheap, but then they started making electric cars and the batteries need a lot of lithium for some reason, and the price has gone up about tenfold for lithium. So anyway, to me, price doesn't make any difference. If I want it, I'm going to buy it. I'm not going to worry about how much it costs. So I put in 15% lithium, or 150 grams. Dab more. Okay, there we go. I'm going to slake that in there, put that in there. All right, put this away. Now, the next ingredient is strontium. Strontium carbonate is a secondary flux, as is lithium. Talk about fluxes in a little bit. So I need 100 grams of this. Okay. There we go, 100 grams of strontium. Strontium is going to mat the glaze out a little bit. Okay, the next ingredient is tin. Tin is an opacifier. Otherwise, it's going to make the glaze opaque as opposed to being transparent. And I'm going to put 7 grams. I'm going to put 7% of the glaze is going to be 10, or 70 grams. There we go, right on the button. Now my next ingredient and last ingredient ingredient is copper carbonate. Copper is a colorant, and depending on what the base is, the copper is going to turn either blue or green, most often blue. And in reduction, post-fire and reduction, it's going to turn copper or red. Oops. So 4% is copper carbonate. I'm going to put 40 grams in here. Getting low on the copper. I've got another bag inside. There we go, 40 grams or 4%. I'm going to put this in there. Now I want to tell you, it's very important to start out with less water than you're going to need. When you add water to a glaze, it's important to add just a splash at a time. You don't want to add too much. If you do, it'll go from being really too thick to really too thin, and then you just have to let it evaporate. You don't want to have to do that. So, I'm going to get some more water. I can see here that it's still going to need a little bit of water. So, just a splash is probably going to be enough. Now we're going to have to let this glaze kind of push some of the chemicals are on top, push it around a little bit. Put a little bit more water in. But you notice I just did a splash, just very little. So what we're going to do now is go inside. I like to mix the glaze outside because the dry materials, like I said, are very toxic to breathe. And I've got an exhaust fan inside, but it'd be hard to talk and do this at the same time with the exhaust fan on. So I'm going to stop this right now, and then I'm going to go inside and show you what to do here. Basically, you want it to sit for 10 or 15 minutes. You want it to get all the particles coated or as much as possible. And then we're gonna mix it up with a mixer, and then we're gonna screen it with an 80 mesh screen twice. And that's gonna get all the particles mixed together and make a good glaze, I hope. Anyway, that's that for right now. And we'll be back in just a second. So something happened to the clip where I was showing you about screening the glazes. It was pretty boring anyway, so you really didn't miss much. Basically what you do is after the glaze is slaked down in the water for a period of time, 15-20 minutes, you then take and mix it up and screen it, pour it through an 80 mesh screen twice, once into a new bucket and then back into its home bucket. And after you do that, it should be ready to go and use as a glaze.